Principal Helen stood in the hallway of Lincoln High School, staring at the papers in her hand. It was a list she hated looking at. Students who were failing, students who might not graduate, students who needed help fast. And right there at the top was a name that made her pause. David Chen. She remembered David from last semester. Quiet kid, always sitting in the back, always looking tired. His teachers said he never turned in homework. His test scores were terrible. Everyone thought he'd drop out before senior year. But something strange had happened. 3 months ago, David's grades started climbing. Not just a little bit, they shot up like a rocket. F's turned into C's, then B's, and last month he even got an A in calculus. Calculus, the same subject he'd been failing miserably. Helen was confused but happy. Obviously, someone was helping him. The school had a tutoring program, and she figured David must have finally signed up. She wanted to meet this tutor, shake their hand, maybe even feature them in the school newsletter. Good news was rare these days, and she wanted to celebrate it. She checked the schedule. David's tutor was supposed to come in today at 3 p.m. Helen waited in her office, practicing what she'd say. "Thank you for your dedication. You're making a real difference." Maybe she'd even give them a gift card to the coffee shop downtown. 3 o'clock came. Helen heard footsteps in the hallway. She stood up, straightened her jacket, put on her best professional smile. The door opened, and Helen's smile froze on her face. It was Robert. Robert Martinez, the night janitor. He stood in the doorway in his gray uniform, holding his mop bucket in one hand. His work boots were scuffed and old. There was a small coffee stain on his shirt pocket. He looked just as surprised to see her as she was to see him. "Oh, sorry, Principal Helen," Robert said, starting to back away. "I didn't know you were having a meeting. I'll come back later to clean." "No, wait," Helen said, still confused. "I'm actually waiting for someone. David Chen's tutor. They should be here any minute." Robert stood there for a moment, not moving. He set down his mop bucket slowly. Then he looked at Helen with those calm, tired eyes he always had. "I'm his tutor," Robert said quietly. Helen just stared at him. For a few seconds, her brain couldn't process what he'd just said. Robert, the janitor, the guy who cleaned the bathrooms and emptied the trash cans? That Robert? Her clipboard slipped from her hands and clattered onto the floor. Papers scattered everywhere. "You're what?" Helen finally managed to say. "I'm David's tutor," Robert repeated a little louder this time. "Have been for 3 months now." Helen bent down to pick up her papers, mostly to give herself time to think. This didn't make sense. Robert was a janitor. He mopped floors. He fixed broken lockers. He restocked toilet paper in the bathrooms. He didn't tutor students. That wasn't his job. That wasn't even legal, was it? "Robert, I don't understand," Helen said, standing back up. "How are you tutoring David? When? Why didn't anyone tell me?" Robert shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He looked uncomfortable, like he'd been caught doing something wrong. "It just kind of happened," he said. "I work the night shift, you know. I'm here from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. cleaning up after everyone goes home. About 3 months ago, I was mopping the 3rd floor near the math classrooms. It was around 8 p.m., way past when students should be here, but I heard someone crying." Helen listened, her arms crossed, trying to understand where this story was going. "I followed the sound," Robert continued. "Found David in Mr. Peterson's classroom, sitting at a desk with his head in his hands. Books everywhere, papers crumpled up all around him. Kid was sobbing like his heart was breaking. Why was he still at school so late?" Helen asked. "His mom works until 9 p.m., Robert explained. David has 2 little brothers at home. If he goes home, he has to watch them, help them with their homework, make them dinner. He can't focus on his own work. So he stays here, tries to study in the empty classrooms, says it's the only quiet place he's got." Helen felt a pang of guilt. She hadn't known any of this. David had always been just another name on the failing list to her. "So what happened?" she asked. "I asked him what was wrong," Robert said. "At first he didn't want to talk. Thought he'd get in trouble for being there so late. But I told him I wouldn't tell anyone. Eventually, he showed me his calculus homework. Said he didn't understand any of it. Said he'd asked his teacher for help, but the teacher was always busy. Said he'd tried to sign up for the free tutoring program. But they told him there was a waiting list. 6 months long." Helen winced. She knew about that waiting list. Budget cuts meant fewer tutors. More students needed help than ever, but there was nobody to give it. "Kid was desperate," Robert continued. "Said he was going to fail. Going to have to repeat junior year, probably just drop out after that. He needed to graduate, needed to get a job to help his mom, but he couldn't graduate if he couldn't pass calculus. So you helped him? Helen asked. I looked at his homework, Robert said. It was basic integration. Chain rule substitution, stuff like that. So I sat down and showed him how to do it. You know calculus? Helen asked, unable to hide her surprise. Robert gave a small, sad smile. Yeah, Principal Helen, I know calculus, but… You're a janitor, Helen said, then immediately regretted how it sounded. Robert didn't seem offended. I am now, he said simply. Helen's mind was racing. Nothing about this made sense. How did a janitor know advanced math? Why had he kept this secret? And what was she supposed to do about it? So that one night turned into more nights? Helen asked. The next evening David was back, Robert said. Same classroom, waiting for me. Had more questions, so I helped him again. Then he came back the next night. And the next? Pretty soon, he was showing up every night I worked during my break time. We'd sit in that classroom for an hour, going through his homework together. Math, science, English, history, whatever he needed help with. And his grades improved, Helen said slowly. Kid's smart, Robert said. He just needed someone to explain things in a way he could understand. Someone who had time to answer his questions. Someone who believed he could do it. Helen sat down in her chair feeling overwhelmed. Part of her wanted to be happy about this. David was succeeding. That's what mattered, right? But another part of her was panicking. This was completely against protocol. Robert wasn't a certified teacher. He wasn't even a certified tutor. If the school board found out, if parents found out, there would be questions, investigations, lawsuits maybe. Robert, Helen said carefully, you understand this is highly unusual, right? You can't just tutor students without proper authorization. There are rules, procedures, background checks, I know. Robert said quietly, I probably should have told someone. But I was worried if I did, they'd make me stop. And David needed help right then, not 6 months from then. Helen rubbed her temples. She could feel a headache coming on. I need to think about this, she said. Don't tutor David tonight. In fact, don't tutor him until I figure out what to do about this situation. Understood? Robert's face fell, but he nodded. Yes, ma'am. He picked up his mop bucket and left the office without another word. After he was gone, Helen pulled out David's file again. She looked at those grades. The transformation from failing to thriving. 3 months. That's all it took when someone actually gave the kid attention and help. She thought about the waiting list for tutors. 6 months. Half a year that students like David didn't have. She thought about Robert, quietly mopping floors at night, carrying around knowledge that nobody knew he had. And she thought about the rules, the procedures, the proper channels that were supposed to protect students but somehow kept failing them. Helen closed the file and stared out her window at the empty parking lot. Tomorrow she'd have to make some decisions. Tonight she just felt confused and a little bit ashamed that a janitor had seen a problem she'd missed and fixed it while she was busy shuffling papers. Sometimes the most important people in a school aren't the ones with titles on their doors, she thought. Sometimes they're the ones nobody pays attention to at all. Helen barely slept that night. She kept thinking about Robert, about David, about the whole impossible situation. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Robert standing in her doorway in his janitor uniform, saying those words. I'm his tutor. By morning, Helen had made a decision. She needed answers, real answers, not just about what Robert had done, but about who he really was and why he'd kept this massive secret. She got to school early before the buses arrived, before the hallways filled with noise. The building was quiet except for the hum of the heating system. Helen went straight to the administrative office and pulled Robert's employment file from the cabinet. The file was thin. Too thin, Robert Martinez, it said. Age 47. Hired 5 years ago as a night custodian. High school diploma from some school in Texas. Previous employment, a gap of several years, then various cleaning jobs. Background check cleared. References checked out. That was it, nothing about calculus. Nothing that explained how a janitor could tutor a student in advanced math and science. Helen felt frustrated. The file told her nothing useful. She needed to talk to Robert directly, needed to understand what was really going on. But she couldn't just call him in during the day. He worked nights, he was probably sleeping. Then she had another idea. If she wanted to know the truth about Robert's tutoring, she should talk to the person who knew it best, David himself. Helen checked the schedule. David had study hall third period. She could pull him out then, have a private conversation in her office. No teachers around, no other students listening. Just her and David talking honestly. The morning dragged on forever. Helen tried to focus on her usual work, answering emails, handling parent complaints, reviewing the budget, but her mind kept wandering. Finally, third period arrived. She sent a note to the study hall monitor. Please send David Chen to the principal's office. 10 minutes later, there was a knock on her door. Come in, Helen called. David entered slowly, looking nervous. He was a skinny kid, maybe 5'8", with messy black hair and dark circles under his eyes. He wore jeans and a hoodie that had seen better days. His backpack looked heavy, stuffed full of books. Am I in trouble? David asked immediately. No, Helen said quickly, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. Sit down. I just want to talk to you about something. David sat, but he didn't relax. His hands gripped the armrest of the chair tightly. I know about Robert, Helen said, deciding to be direct. I know he's been tutoring you. David's eyes went wide. He told you? I asked to meet your tutor, Helen explained. He showed up. It was surprising. Please don't fire him, David said, his voice suddenly urgent. Please, Principal Helen, this isn't his fault. I'm the one who kept asking him for help. He was just being nice. If anyone should get in trouble, it's me. Nobody's getting fired, Helen said, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true yet. I just need to understand what's been happening. Can you tell me your side of the story? David took a deep breath. It started 3 months ago, he began. I was staying late at school trying to do my homework. I stay late most nights because your mom works late and you have brothers at home, Helen finished. Robert told me? Oh, David said. Yeah, I can't concentrate at home. My brothers are loud, they need help with their stuff, and our apartment is small. So I stay here. I know I'm not supposed to, but nobody ever noticed before. Helen made a mental note to change that. Students shouldn't have to hide in empty classrooms just to do homework. What happened that first night? Helen asked. I was trying to do calculus, David said. Mr. Peterson's homework. We were learning about integrals and I didn't get it. I'd watched the lesson, I'd read the textbook, I'd watched videos online, but nothing made sense. And I knew if I failed this unit, I'd fail the class. If I failed calculus, I couldn't graduate on time. His voice cracked a little. I was so frustrated I started crying. I know that sounds stupid. It doesn't sound stupid, Helen said gently. Robert found me, David continued. He was mopping the hallway outside the classroom. He heard me, I guess, came in and asked what was wrong. I was embarrassed, but I was also desperate, so I told him. Showed him the homework. And he helped you? Helen prompted. He looked at the problems for like 30 seconds, David said. Then he sat down and started explaining. Not like a teacher, you know? Like a person. He didn't use complicated words or rush through it. He drew pictures, made up little stories to help me remember the rules. Within an hour, I understood it. After weeks of being confused, suddenly it all made sense. Helen listened carefully, watching David's face light up as he talked. The next night I came back, David said. I wanted to thank him, and I had more questions about the next homework assignment. He helped me again during his break. Then it just became our routine. Every night he works, I'm there during his break time. We sit in room 304 and go through whatever I'm struggling with. Just math? Helen asked. At first, yeah, David said. But then I had a history paper due and I didn't know how to organize my thoughts. Robert helped me make an outline. Then I had a chemistry test and he explained the periodic table in a way that actually stuck in my head. He's good at teaching everything, not just math. Helen leaned back in her chair. David, did Robert ever ask you for money? What? No. David looked shocked. Never. I offered once because I felt bad taking up his break time. He said absolutely not, that he was just happy to help. Did he ever make you uncomfortable in any way? Helen asked, knowing she had to ask this question. No, David said firmly. Robert's the nicest person I've ever met. He treats me with respect. He never talks down to me like I'm dumb, even though I ask a lot of stupid questions. He's patient and kind and... David stopped, his eyes getting watery.
He's the only reason I haven't given up. What do you mean?
Helen asked softly. David looked down at his hands. Last semester I was going to drop out. I really was. I was failing everything, I was exhausted all the time. My mom was working herself to death, and I thought, maybe I should just quit school and get a job to help her. But then Robert started helping me, and my grades got better, and I realized maybe I could actually do this. Maybe I could graduate. Maybe I could even go to college someday, get a good job, help my mom for real. Tears rolled down David's cheeks now. Robert gave me hope, he said quietly. Nobody else did that. Not the teachers who were too busy. Not the counselor who put me on a waiting list. Just Robert, the janitor, who was willing to spend his break time with me. Helen felt her own throat tighten. She pulled a tissue box from her drawer and pushed it across the desk to David. "Thank you for being honest with me," Helen said. "I know this is scary." David wiped his eyes. "Are you going to make him stop?" That was the question, wasn't it? Helen looked at this kid. This smart, hard-working kid who'd been let down by every system that was supposed to help him. A kid who'd finally found support from the most unlikely source. "I don't know yet," Helen admitted. "What Robert did was against the rules. He's not a certified tutor. He's not authorized to work with students that way. If something went wrong, the school could get in serious trouble." But nothing went wrong, David said. Everything went right. For the first time in my life, everything went right. After David left, Helen sat alone in her office for a long time. She looked at his transcript again. 3 months ago, FFDFF. Now, BABB. The evidence was undeniable. She thought about the rules. Rules existed for good reasons. To protect students, to ensure quality education, to prevent problems. But what happened when following the rules meant abandoning a student who desperately needed help? Helen pulled out her phone and called the school board office. She made an appointment for later that week. Then she called Robert's supervisor in the maintenance department and got his cell phone number. That evening, around 6 p.m., when Robert would be starting his shift, Helen called him. "Hello?" Robert's voice sounded cautious. "Robert, it's Principal Helen. I need to talk to you. Can you come to my office?" "Am I being fired?" he asked bluntly. "No," Helen said. "Not yet, anyway. I just need answers. Real answers. Who are you really, Robert? How does a janitor know calculus and chemistry and history well enough to tutor a failing student into honor roll territory?" There was a long silence on the phone. "That's a complicated story," Robert finally said. "I've got time," Helen replied. "Okay," Robert said quietly. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. Helen hung up and waited. She had a feeling that whatever Robert was about to tell her would change everything. Outside her window, the sun was setting. The parking lot lights flickered on. Students were long gone. Teachers had gone home. And the building was entering its night phase, the time when Robert's world began. Soon, Helen would understand why a janitor carried around secrets that could transform lives. And she'd have to decide what to do with the truth. Robert arrived at Helen's office exactly 10 minutes later. He'd changed out of his work uniform and wore jeans and a simple button-down shirt. Without the janitor clothes, he looked different somehow. Older, more serious, like he was carrying invisible weight on his shoulders. Helen gestured to the chair, and Robert sat down. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The office was quiet except for the hum of Helen's computer and the distant sound of a floor buffer running somewhere in the building. "Before you say anything," Helen began, "I want you to know that I talked to David today. He told me everything about how you've been helping him." Robert nodded slowly. "Is he okay?" "He's terrified I'm going to make you stop," Helen said. "He cried in my office, Robert. He said you're the only reason he hasn't given up." Robert's jaw tightened, but he didn't say anything. "I need to understand something," Helen continued. "Your employment file says you have a high school diploma. It says you've worked cleaning jobs for the past few years. It says nothing about advanced education or teaching experience. Yet you can tutor calculus, chemistry, and apparently several other subjects well enough to turn a failing student into an A student. So I'm going to ask you directly, who are you really?" Robert was quiet for a long moment. He stared at his hands, rough and calloused from years of manual labor. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft and sad. 15 years ago, he said, I wasn't Robert Martinez, the janitor. I was Dr. Robert Martinez, Associate Professor of Mathematics at Central State University. Helen's eyes widened. "You were a professor?" "For 8 years," Robert said. "I taught calculus, linear algebra, differential equations. I published research papers. I mentored graduate students. I had tenure track, an office with a window, respect from my colleagues. I had a good life. What happened? Helen asked gently. Robert took a deep breath. My wife Carmen was driving home from work one night. It was raining. A drunk driver ran a red light and hit her car at full speed. He paused. She died instantly. We'd been married 12 years. I'm so sorry, Helen said quietly. We didn't have kids, Robert continued, his voice flat now, like he was reading from a script he'd memorized. We'd been trying, but it never happened. Carmen was everything to me. My best friend, my partner, the reason I got up in the morning. When she died, I broke. He looked up at Helen, and she could see the pain still there in his eyes even after all these years. I stopped going to work, Robert said, stopped answering emails, stopped caring about anything. Depression hit me like a train. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't function. The university was patient at first. They gave me bereavement leave, but weeks turned into months and I wasn't getting better. Eventually they had to let me go. That's understandable, Helen said. It gets worse, Robert interrupted. Without my job, I couldn't pay the mortgage. Lost the house. I had some savings, but depression is expensive. Therapy, medication, just trying to survive each day. The money ran out. I ended up staying with my brother for a while, but I was such a mess that I wore out my welcome. Eventually, I was living in my car. Helen felt her heart breaking for this man. I was homeless for 2 years, Robert said. 2 years of sleeping in parking lots, eating at shelters, feeling like I'd lost everything that made me who I was. I'd gone from Dr. Martinez with a PhD in mathematics to some guy people looked through like I didn't exist. How did you get back on your feet? Helen asked, slowly. Robert said. Very slowly. I started taking my medication regularly again. Started going to support groups, made a few friends at the shelter who helped me see that my life wasn't over. It was just different now. Eventually, I got a job washing dishes at a restaurant. Then I got a better job doing maintenance at an office building. Then this job came up 5 years ago. Night custodian at Lincoln High School. It paid better than my other jobs, had health insurance, and I took it. Why didn't you try to go back to teaching? Helen asked. Robert gave a bitter laugh. With a 2-year gap in my resume where I was homeless? No university would hire me. I tried, believe me. Sent out applications, got nothing but rejections or silence. The academic world doesn't forgive that kind of disruption. Once you fall off the ladder, it's almost impossible to climb back on. But you're brilliant, Helen said. David's grades prove that. Being smart doesn't matter if nobody gives you a chance, Robert said quietly. And honestly, after a while I stopped trying. I made peace with being a janitor. There's dignity in this work. I keep the school clean. I fix things that are broken. I do honest work for honest pay. It's not what I imagined for my life, but it's enough. Until David, Helen said. Until David, Robert agreed. That night I found him crying in the classroom. Something woke up inside me. I saw this kid desperate for help, drowning in a subject I could teach in my sleep. And I thought, what's the point of having all this knowledge if I can't use it to help someone who needs it? So you became his tutor, Helen said. I didn't plan to, Robert said. I really didn't. I just wanted to help him with that one homework assignment. But he came back the next night. And the next, and I realized that teaching him felt good. It felt like I was being useful again. Like I was the person I used to be, the person who loved helping students understand difficult concepts. Why didn't you tell anyone? Helen asked. Why keep it secret? Robert sighed. Because I knew what would happen. I'd have to explain who I used to be, why I'm not a professor anymore, all the painful history. People would either pity me or doubt me. And then there'd be all the bureaucratic questions. Credentials, certifications, liability issues. I figured they'd shut it down before David could really benefit. So I kept quiet and just tried to help this one kid. Helen leaned back in her chair, processing everything she'd heard. This changed things. Robert wasn't some random janitor pretending to know math. He was a legitimate expert, someone who'd taught at university level, who'd dedicated his life to education before tragedy struck. Robert, what you did for David is remarkable, Helen said carefully. But you must understand the position this puts me in. You're technically not authorized to work with students. If something had gone wrong, if David had gotten hurt somehow during your tutoring sessions, the school would be liable. I'd be liable for not knowing it was happening. I know, Robert said. I'm sorry. I should have come to you first. But you didn't, Helen said, because you knew I'd have to say no, because the rules don't have room for people like you, people who fell down but still have so much to offer. Robert nodded. Helen stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the parking lot was dark except for a few streetlights. She could see Robert's old Toyota Corolla parked in the staff section, rusty and dented but still running. I have to make a decision about this, Helen said, still looking out the window. I could follow protocol, tell you to stop tutoring David, maybe even let you go to protect the school from liability. That would be the safe choice. I understand, Robert said quietly. Or, Helen continued, turning to face him, I could do something crazy, something that might get me in trouble with the school board but might also be the right thing to do. Robert looked up at her, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Give me a few days, Helen said. Don't tutor David until I figure this out. Can you do that? Yes, ma'am, Robert said, and Robert, Helen added, thank you for telling me the truth. I know that wasn't easy. After Robert left, Helen sat back down at her desk and opened her laptop. She started researching alternative teaching certifications, emergency credentials, anything that might create a legal pathway for Robert to do officially what he'd been doing in secret. The more she searched, the more complicated it seemed. But Helen wasn't ready to give up. Sometimes the system needed to be pushed, bent, maybe even broken a little to serve the people it was supposed to help. She thought about David, a kid who'd been ready to drop out until a janitor gave him hope. She thought about Robert, a brilliant man who'd lost everything but still had knowledge and compassion to share. And she thought about all the other students on her failing list, kids who needed help the system wasn't providing. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to turn this impossible situation into something good. Something that could help not just David, but other students like him. Helen pulled out her phone and called her contact at the district office. It was late, but this couldn't wait. Hey, it's Principal Helen, she said when the call connected. I need to talk to you about something. It's complicated, probably against several policies and definitely going to sound crazy, but I think it might also be exactly what our students need. She took a deep breath and started explaining. The conversation was going to be difficult, maybe even career-threatening. But some things were more important than playing it safe. Some things were worth fighting for. 3 days passed since Helen's conversation with Robert. 3 days of research, phone calls, and sleepless nights trying to figure out the right thing to do. She'd talked to the district office, reviewed school policies, and even consulted with the school's lawyer. Everyone gave her the same advice: shut it down, follow protocol, protect yourself. But Helen couldn't stop thinking about David. She'd only gotten one side of his story, the surface level. She needed to understand the full picture before making her final decision. So on Thursday morning, she called David back to her office. This time, David didn't look nervous. He looked tired and sad, like he'd already accepted bad news before it came. Sit down. David? Helen said gently. He sat, his backpack hitting the floor with a heavy thud. I haven't made a final decision yet, Helen began. But before I do, I need to understand something better. I need you to tell me the complete truth about your situation. Not just the parts about Robert, but everything. Your home life, your struggles, what school is really like for you. David looked at her warily. Why? Because I'm trying to help, Helen said. I know that's hard to believe right now, but I am. I just need the full picture. David was quiet for a moment, then he started talking. And once he started, everything poured out like water breaking through a dam. My mom works 3 jobs, David said. She cleans offices in the morning, works at a grocery store in the afternoon, and does night shifts at a nursing home on weekends. She's never home. When she is home, she's sleeping or too exhausted to talk. Helen listened carefully, taking notes. My dad left when I was 8. David continued. Just walked out one day and never came back. Didn't leave money, didn't call, nothing. So it's just been Mom trying to support 3 kids alone. My little brothers are 7 and 9. I'm the oldest, so I'm supposed to take care of them. That's a lot of responsibility, Helen said. After school, I go home and make sure they do their homework, David explained. Then I make dinner, usually something simple like spaghetti or sandwiches. Then I get them ready for bed. By the time they're asleep, it's like 9 p.m. and I'm exhausted. Our apartment is tiny, just 2 bedrooms. I share a room with my brothers. They snore, They move around a lot, they're loud. I can't concentrate there. Is that why you stay at school so late? Helen asked. Yeah, David said. I figured out last year that if I stay here, I can actually focus. The building is quiet, the classrooms are empty, and nobody bothers me. I just do my homework and study in peace. It's the only way I can get any work done. Helen felt terrible. She'd worked in education for 20 years, and she'd never really thought about students like David, kids who didn't have quiet homes to study in, who were too busy taking care of family to take care of their own education. What about your teachers? Helen asked. Haven't you asked them for help? David laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. I've tried, Mr. Peterson, my calculus teacher. I went to him after class last year, told him I didn't understand integrals. He said he had a meeting and I should watch some online videos. I did, but they didn't help. So I went back, and he said I should come to his office hours. Did you? Helen asked. His office hours are from 3 to 4 p.m. on Tuesdays and Thursdays, David said. I can't make those times. That's when I need to be home with my brothers. I explained that to him, asked if we could meet a different time. He said his schedule was full and suggested I sign up for the free tutoring program. And you did? Helen prompted. I tried, David said. I went to the counseling office, filled out the forms. They told me there's a waiting list, 6 months minimum. I asked if there was anything sooner, and the counselor just said they didn't have enough tutors for all the students who need help. She gave me some website links for online practice problems and wished me good luck. Helen felt anger rising in her chest, not at the counselor or Mr. Peterson specifically, but at a system that left students like David with nowhere to turn. So you were failing, Helen said. Everything, David confirmed. Calculus, chemistry, history, English, all of it. Not because I'm dumb, but because I didn't understand the material and nobody had time to explain it to me. I was drowning, and everyone kept throwing me pamphlets about swimming instead of actually helping me. And you were thinking about dropping out? Helen asked. David's eyes got watery. I was going to do it at the end of last semester. I'd already made up my mind. I was going to tell my mom that I needed to get a full-time job to help with bills. We're always behind on rent. The electricity gets shut off sometimes. We eat a lot of rice and beans because that's what we can afford. I thought if I worked full-time I could help, make things easier for her. But you didn't drop out, Helen said. Because of Robert, David said, his voice cracking. That night he found me in the classroom. I was at my absolute lowest point. I'd just gotten back another failed test, 37% in calculus. I knew I was going to fail the class. I knew I was going to fail junior year, and I just broke down. Tears were running down David's face now. Robert sat with me for 2 hours that first night. He didn't just help me with calculus. He talked to me like I was a person. He asked about my life, listened to my problems. He told me about how he'd been through hard times too. He said something I'll never forget. What did he say? Helen asked softly. He said, your situation is temporary, but dropping out is permanent. Don't make a permanent decision based on a temporary problem, David recited. Then he helped me understand calculus in a way that made sense. And for the first time in months, I felt like maybe I could do this. Maybe I wasn't stupid after all. David wiped his eyes with his sleeve. Every night after that, Robert helped me. Not just with homework, but with everything. When I didn't understand chemistry, he explained it. When I had to write an essay, he helped me organize my thoughts. When I was stressed about my brothers or my mom or money, he listened. He became like a dad, kind of. The only adult in my life who actually cared. Helen pulled out the tissue box again and slid it across her desk. My grades got better, David continued. Not just better, they got good. I started understanding things. I started believing I could actually graduate, maybe even go to college. I started thinking about a future where I'm not just working minimum wage jobs my whole life. Robert gave me that. He gave me hope when I had none. What would happen if Robert stopped tutoring you? Helen asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. David looked at her directly. I'd probably be okay with the calculus and chemistry now. He taught me how to learn, not just how to do specific problems. But the other students. Helen interrupted. What do you mean? David looked nervous. I wasn't supposed to tell anyone. David, I need to know everything, Helen said firmly. There are 4 other students, David admitted quietly. I told a couple of friends about Robert, about how he was helping me. They were struggling too. I asked Robert if he could help them, and he said yes. So now 5 of us meet with him on different nights. He gives us each an hour during his breaks. Helen felt her headache returning. This was bigger than she'd thought. Not 1 student, but 5. 5 students meeting secretly with an unauthorized tutor. Who are the others? Helen asked. Lisa Chang. She was failing chemistry. David said. Tommy Rodriguez, he needed help with English because he's still learning the language. Kelly Armstrong. She's got dyslexia and the regular teaching methods don't work for her. And Andrew Jackson. He's homeless living with his uncle right now. Failing everything because his life is chaos. Helen wrote down the names. She knew all of them. They were all on her failing student list. Or at least they had been. She pulled up her computer and checked their current grades. Lisa Chang C. BBC, Tommy Rodriguez B, Kelly Armstrong C, CBC, Andrew Jackson CCC. All of them had improved, dramatically in just a few months. Robert is saving 5 students, Helen said quietly, almost to herself. More than that, David said. He's saving our futures. Lisa wants to be a nurse now. She didn't think she could before. Tommy is applying to community college. Kelly is getting tested for accommodations. And she's starting to believe she's not dumb, just different. Andrew has hope for the first time in years. And me? David's voice got stronger. I'm going to graduate. I'm going to go to college. I'm going to get a degree and a good job and help my mom retire early so she doesn't have to work herself to death. David leaned forward in his chair. Please, Principal Helen, please don't make Robert stop. Not just for me, but for all of us. We're the kids who fall through the cracks. The ones the system forgot about. Robert is the only person who saw us and actually helped. If you take that away, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Helen sat back in her chair, feeling the weight of this decision pressing down on her shoulders. 5 students, 5 lives changed, and probably more who needed help but hadn't found it yet. The rules said Robert shouldn't be tutoring students. The rules said this was a liability issue. The rules said she should shut this down immediately, but the evidence said Robert was doing what the entire school system had failed to do, actually helping struggling students succeed. Thank you for being honest with me, Helen finally said. Go back to class. I'll let you know my decision soon. Helen didn't sleep at all that night. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind going in circles. The school board meeting was scheduled for Friday afternoon, just 2 days away. 2 days to figure out how to present an impossible situation in a way that wouldn't end her career. She kept playing out different scenarios in her head. Each one ended badly. Scenario 1. She tells the truth, asks the board to make an exception, and they say no. Robert gets fired for violating policy. The 5 students lose their tutor and probably start failing again. Helen looks incompetent for letting it happen under her watch. Scenario 2. She fires Robert preemptively to show she's handling the situation. The students are devastated. Robert loses his job. But Helen protects herself and the school from liability. Scenario 3. She tries to find a middle ground, some creative solution. The board thinks she's overstepping her authority. They shut it down anyway and possibly put her on probation for not following protocol immediately. Every scenario ended with Robert losing his job and the students losing their help. Helen felt trapped between doing what was right and doing what was safe. At 3 a.m., she gave up on sleep. She went to her kitchen, made coffee, and opened her laptop at the dining room table. If she was going to propose something to the board, she needed facts, data, evidence that what Robert was doing actually mattered. She started pulling reports, test scores, attendance records, discipline referrals. For all 5 students Robert was tutoring, plus David, the patterns were clear. Before Robert, failing grades, high absenteeism, discipline problems. After Robert, improving grades, better attendance, fewer issues. The correlation was undeniable, but correlation wasn't enough. The board would say the students might have improved anyway. She needed something more concrete. Helen started researching education policy. She looked up alternative certification programs, emergency teaching credentials, volunteer tutor requirements. She read case studies from other districts that had faced similar situations. She looked for any legal precedent that might support what she wanted to do. Hours passed. The sun came up. Helen's coffee went cold, but she kept working. By noon, she had a file folder 3 inches thick with research, data, and half-formed ideas. But she still didn't have a solution. Everything she found pointed to the same conclusion. What Robert was doing violated policy, and there was no easy workaround. Helen's phone rang. It was her assistant principal, Ben. "Hey, you okay?" Ben asked. "You've been holed up in your office all week. People are starting to notice." "I'm fine," Helen lied. "You're not fine," Ben said. "Come on, Helen. We've worked together for 5 years. I know when something's eating at you. What's going on?" Helen hesitated. She hadn't told anyone about the Robert situation yet. But she trusted Ben. Maybe talking it through would help. "Can you come to my office?" Helen asked. "I need advice." 20 minutes later, Ben sat across from Helen's desk, listening as she explained everything. The tutoring, Robert's background, the 5 students, her upcoming board meeting. She left nothing out. When she finished, Ben was quiet for a long moment. "Wow," he finally said. "Yeah," Helen agreed. "So you're planning to ask the board to basically make up a new position for this guy? To legitimize what he's been doing in secret?" "I don't know what I'm planning," Helen admitted. "That's the problem. I know what the right thing is. Keep Robert helping these kids. But I don't know how to make that happen within the rules." Ben leaned back in his chair, thinking. "What does Robert want?" he asked. "I haven't asked him," Helen said. "I told him to stop tutoring until I figured things out." "Maybe you should ask him," Ben suggested. "This whole thing affects him most of all. He should have a say in what happens next." Helen nodded slowly. Ben was right. She'd been so focused on the policy problems that she hadn't considered what Robert actually wanted. That evening, Helen called Robert again and asked him to come in early before his shift started. They met in her office at 5 p.m., just as the after-school activities were wrapping up and the building was getting quiet. "Robert, I need to know something," Helen said once they were settled. "What do you want?" "Not what you think I want to hear, but what you actually want for yourself." Robert looked surprised by the question. "I want to keep helping the students," he said simply. "Even if it means going through background checks, getting certified, dealing with bureaucracy?" Helen asked. "Even then," Robert said. "Helen, I'm 47 years old. I spent 15 years mourning the life I lost. These past 3 months helping David and the others, it's the first time I've felt alive since my wife died. It's given me purpose again, made me feel like I'm worth something." "You are worth something," Helen said firmly. "I know that now," Robert said, "but I didn't for a long time. Teaching these kids reminded me that I have value, that my knowledge and experience matter. If there's any way to keep doing this officially properly, whatever it takes, I'll do it. Even if it means your past becomes public?" Helen asked gently. "People will know you were homeless. They'll know you lost everything." Robert smiled sadly. "I'm not ashamed anymore," he said. "I used to be. Used to think my homeless years defined me, made me less than other people. But David and the others don't care about that. They just care that I showed up when they needed help. If telling my story helps make this work, then that's what I'll do." Helen felt a surge of respect for this man. He'd been through hell and come out the other side stronger and more compassionate. "Okay," Helen said. "Then here's what I'm thinking. I'm going to propose to the school board that we create a new position, a part-time educational support specialist. Someone who provides after-hours tutoring for at-risk students. We'd pay you a real wage, give you proper credentials, make everything official." "Do you think they'll go for it?" Robert asked, honestly. "I don't know," Helen admitted. "It's unprecedented. It'll cost money we don't really have. And some board members are very by the book. They might shut me down immediately." "What happens if they say no?" Robert asked. Helen took a deep breath. "Then I have to decide whether to follow their orders or fight for what I think is right." "And that could cost me my job." Robert looked alarmed. "Helen, don't risk your career for this, for me. It's not worth it." "It's not just for you," Helen said. "It's for David and Lisa and Tommy and Kelly and Andrew. It's for every student who falls through the cracks because our system is too rigid to help them. And honestly, Robert, if I'm not willing to fight for them, then what am I even doing in this job?" They sat in silence for a moment. "Thank you," Robert said quietly. "Don't thank me yet," Helen replied.
We haven't won anything.
"The board meeting is Friday. Until then, all we can do is prepare and hope." After Robert left, Helen returned to her research. She worked late into the night again, refining her proposal, anticipating objections, building the strongest case she could. By Thursday afternoon, she had a presentation ready. 30 slides full of data, testimonials, budget projections, and policy proposals. She'd practiced her speech a dozen times. She'd prepared answers to every question she could imagine, but she still felt terrified. That evening, she got a text from David. "Is there any news? We're all really worried." Helen stared at her phone. 5 students waiting to hear if their lifeline would be cut. 1 janitor waiting to find out if his purpose would be taken away. 1 principal about to put her entire career on the line. She texted back, "Meeting tomorrow. I'm going to fight for this." "That's all I can promise," David responded immediately. "That's enough. Thank you." Helen set her phone down and looked at her presentation one more time. Tomorrow she would walk into that board meeting and make her case. She'd present the facts, tell the stories, and ask for something unprecedented, and then she'd find out if doing the right thing was enough. She thought about a quote she'd read years ago in graduate school. "The measure of a society is how it treats its most vulnerable members." Well, David and the others were vulnerable. They'd been failed by the system, overlooked by their teachers, and put on waiting lists that might never move. Until Robert saw them. Until he decided that cleaning bathrooms didn't mean he couldn't also change lives. Helen closed her laptop and went to bed. Tomorrow would determine whether one janitor's compassion could inspire an entire school district to do better, or whether the rules would win as they usually did, and another opportunity to help struggling students would be lost. She fell asleep thinking about David's words. He's the only person who saw us and actually helped. Maybe it was time for the whole school system to start seeing students like David, really seeing them, and maybe it would take a janitor to teach them how. Friday morning arrived cold and gray. Helen put on her best professional suit, navy blue, conservative, nothing that would distract from her message. She checked her presentation 3 more times, making sure every slide was perfect. Her hand shook slightly as she printed copies of her proposal for each board member. The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. at the district office. Helen arrived 30 minutes early with a briefcase full of documents and a stomach full of anxiety. The conference room was large and intimidating, with a long table where the 7 board members would sit, and a smaller table facing them where Helen would present. Superintendent Dr. Patricia Gomez arrived shortly after Helen. She was in her mid-50s, a career educator known for being tough but fair. Principal Helen, Dr. Gomez greeted her. "I've read your meeting request. This proposal about the janitor, it's quite unusual." "Yes, ma'am," Helen said. "But the situation is unusual too. I hope you have a very good explanation prepared," Dr. Gomez said, her tone neutral. "Some board members are already skeptical." Helen's heart sank a little, but she kept her expression confident. "I have all the evidence I need." At 2 p.m. sharp, the 7 board members filed in and took their seats. Helen recognized most of them. Mr. Peterson, a retired businessman who always voted for budget cuts. Mrs. Jackson, a parent representative who cared deeply about student safety. Dr. Kumar, a former teacher who understood classroom challenges. Ms. Washington, a community leader focused on equity issues. 3 others she'd met briefly at various school events. Dr. Gomez called the meeting to order. "We have one item on today's special session agenda. Principal Helen Martinez has requested time to present a proposal regarding an unauthorized tutoring situation at Lincoln High School. Principal Helen, you have the floor." Helen stood, clicked to her first slide, and took a deep breath. "Thank you, Dr. Gomez, board members. 3 weeks ago, I discovered that Robert Martinez, our night custodian, has been secretly tutoring failing students after hours. This is against policy. It's unauthorized. And it's the most effective intervention our school has seen in years." She could see several board members sit up straighter, their interest caught. Helen clicked to the next slide, showing before and after grade comparisons for all 5 students. These are the results. 6 students who were failing are now passing and in some cases excelling. This happened in just 3 months. How is a janitor qualified to tutor students? Mr. Peterson interrupted. "I'm glad you asked," Helen said, clicking to the next slide. "Robert Martinez has a PhD in mathematics. He was an associate professor at Central State University for 8 years, before personal tragedy led to him leaving academia. He's more qualified than many of our certified tutors." She saw surprise on several faces. Let me tell you about one student, Helen continued. She told David's story, the 3 jobs his mother worked, his responsibility for his brothers, his inability to get help through normal channels, his plan to drop out. She showed his grade trajectory, his attendance improvement, his behavioral changes. This student was ready to quit school, Helen said, not because he wasn't smart, but because our system didn't have time for him. A 6-month waiting list for tutoring isn't help, it's a rejection. Mrs. Jackson raised her hand. Principal Helen, I'm sympathetic to these student situations. But we have policies for a reason. What if something had gone wrong? What if this janitor had harmed a student? The liability would be enormous. You're absolutely right, Helen acknowledged. That's why I'm here. What Robert did was wrong procedurally, but it was right ethically. And instead of just shutting it down, I want to propose a way to make it legal, safe, and expandable. She clicked to her proposal slide. I'm asking the board to create a new position, after-hours educational support specialist. It would be a part-time position, 15 hours per week with proper background checks, oversight, and credentials. Where would the funding come from? Mr. Peterson asked immediately. We have unused community education funds, Helen explained, showing her budget breakdown. Additionally, 3 of our current tutoring contracts are expiring and the contractors have been ineffective. We could reallocate those funds. The total cost would be roughly equivalent to what we're already spending, but with dramatically better results. Dr. Kumar leaned forward. What about certification? Even with his PhD, he'd need proper teaching credentials to work with students. I've researched emergency certification pathways, Helen said, clicking to that slide. Given his previous teaching experience and advanced degree, he qualifies for an emergency credential while completing the full certification process. The state allows this for highly qualified individuals. It would take him about 6 months to complete, and I'm proposing the district support that process. This seems like a lot of special treatment for one person, Ms. Washington observed. It's not about special treatment, Helen said passionately. It's about recognizing that we have students falling through cracks in our system. David isn't unique. There are dozens more like him, students who need help but can't access it through normal channels. Students from low-income families who can't afford private tutors. Students with complicated home situations who need flexible scheduling. Students who've been overlooked so long they've stopped believing in themselves. She clicked to her next slide, showing statistics on the school's failing students, the tutoring program waiting list, and the gap between need and resources. We're failing these kids, Helen said bluntly. Not intentionally, but we're failing them nonetheless. And then a janitor, someone we didn't even see as an educator, stepped in and did what we couldn't. Yes, he broke the rules, but he exposed a massive gap in our services. We can punish him for that, or we can learn from it. The room was silent for a moment. What you're really proposing, Dr. Gomez said slowly, is a pilot program that could change how we think about educational support. Yes, Helen said. I'm calling it the Second Chance Educator Initiative. It would allow qualified individuals who left teaching, for whatever reason, to return through alternative pathways. People like Robert who have expertise and passion but fell off the traditional career ladder. That's radical, Mr. Peterson said, frowning. It's necessary, Helen countered. How many other qualified people are working jobs below their ability because they had a gap in their resume? Because they faced depression or homelessness or family crisis? We're wasting human potential while students desperately need help. Mrs. Jackson spoke up. I want to hear from this janitor, Robert Martinez. If we're going to consider this, I need to hear from him directly. Helen hadn't anticipated this, but she nodded. I can call him right now. He's willing to answer any questions. Do it, Dr. Gomez said. Helen pulled out her phone and called Robert. Can you come to the district office? The board wants to talk to you. 20 minutes later, Robert arrived. He was wearing the same simple clothes from their previous meeting, jeans and a button-down shirt. He looked nervous but determined as he stood before the board. Mr. Martinez, Mrs. Jackson began. Why did you start tutoring students without permission? Robert took a moment before answering. Because I found a kid crying over homework he couldn't understand, and I knew I could help. I didn't think about policies or procedures. I just saw someone who needed help that nobody else was giving him. But you knew it was against the rules, Mr. Peterson pressed. Yes, sir, Robert admitted, and I should have come forward. But I was afraid. Afraid you'd shut it down before the students could benefit. Afraid my past would disqualify me. So I stayed quiet and just tried to help where I could. Tell us about your past, Dr. Kumar said gently. Robert did. He told them about being a professor, about losing his wife, about depression and homelessness and slowly rebuilding his life. His voice cracked a few times, but he didn't hide anything. Working with these students, Robert said, gave me back something I lost when Carmen died, a sense of purpose, a feeling that my life still matters. I know I'm just a janitor, but when I'm helping David understand calculus, or showing Lisa how chemistry makes sense, or listening to Tommy practice his English, in those moments, I'm still Dr. Martinez. I'm still the teacher I was meant to be. Helen watched the board members' faces. She could see some of them were moved. If the board approves this position, Ms. Washington asked, would you commit to getting properly certified, following all the rules going forward? Absolutely, Robert said. I'm not trying to work outside the system. I just want to help students. If you give me the chance to do it officially, I'll do whatever it takes to meet your standards. Dr. Gomez looked at her fellow board members. We need to discuss this privately. Principal Helen, Mr. Martinez, please wait outside. Helen and Robert sat in the hallway for what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes. Neither spoke much. The tension was too heavy. Finally, the door opened. Dr. Gomez's face was unreadable. Please come back in, she said. Helen and Robert returned to their seats. The 7 board members looked at them, and Helen couldn't tell from their expressions which way this had gone. Dr. Gomez cleared her throat. This board has discussed Principal Helen's proposal extensively. It's unprecedented. It raises legitimate concerns about policy, liability, and precedent. Several members had serious reservations. 2 weeks after the board meeting, Robert Martinez walked through the front doors of Lincoln High School at 3 p.m. instead of 6 p.m. He wasn't wearing his gray custodian uniform. Instead, he wore khakis and a button-down shirt with a lanyard around his neck that read, Educational Support Specialist. It felt surreal. Helen had worked quickly to set everything in motion. Robert's background check came back clean. His emergency teaching certification was approved by the state. The school converted an unused storage room near the library into a proper tutoring center with desks, chairs, a whiteboard, and shelves full of textbooks. They'd even put a small sign on the door, After Hours Academic Support, Robert Martinez. That first official day, Robert stood in his new space, looking around in wonder. Just 3 weeks ago, he'd been mopping these same floors. Now he had his own room, his own desk, his own purpose. David was his first official student. He showed up at 3:30 p.m. with a huge smile on his face. This is so weird, David said, looking around the room. It's official now. You're like a real teacher. I was always a real teacher, Robert said with a smile. Now I just have paperwork to prove it. They sat down and got to work on calculus, just like they had dozens of times before. But something felt different, better. Robert didn't have to rush through explanations during his break anymore. He had proper time, proper resources, proper recognition. By the end of the week, word had spread through the school. The janitor who became a teacher. Students started showing up at Robert's door, some of them the ones he'd been secretly helping, others who'd heard about the new tutoring program. Lisa arrived on Tuesday. I can't believe this is real, she said, tears in her eyes. I was so scared they were going to make you stop helping us. Tommy came on Wednesday, bringing 2 friends who were also struggling with English. Mr. Robert, can you help them too? He asked hopefully. That's why I'm here, Robert said warmly. Within 2 weeks, Robert had a steady stream of students. Some needed help with specific subjects. Others just needed a quiet place to study with someone who believed in them. Robert's calendar filled up quickly, 15 hours per week, split between afternoon and evening sessions to accommodate students with different schedules. Helen watched the transformation with satisfaction, but she also watched something else happen, something she hadn't fully anticipated. Teachers started noticing. Mr. Peterson, the calculus teacher who'd been too busy to help David, stopped by Robert's room one afternoon. He stood in the doorway awkwardly, watching Robert explain integration to a small group of students. Can I help you? Robert asked politely. No, Mr. Peterson paused. I wanted to see what you're doing differently. David Chen was failing my class for months. Now he's getting A's. I've been teaching calculus for 20 years and I'm wondering what I'm missing. Robert could have been defensive. He could have made Mr. Peterson feel bad for not helping David when he'd asked. But he didn't. You're not missing anything, Robert said kindly. You're just stretched too thin. You have 150 students across 5 classes. I have 15 students total right now. I can give them individual attention you don't have time for. It's not about being better. It's about having resources. Mr. Peterson nodded slowly, looking thoughtful. Would you be willing to meet sometime? Share your teaching methods? Maybe I could learn something. I'd be happy to, Robert said. After Mr. Peterson left, David whispered, That was cool of you. He wasn't very nice when I asked him for help. He's not a bad teacher, Robert said. He's just overwhelmed. Most teachers are. The system asks them to do too much with too little. The conversation with Mr. Peterson sparked something. Other teachers started dropping by, curious about what Robert was doing. Some were skeptical at first. After all, he'd been a janitor just weeks ago. But when they saw the results, when they talked to the students who were succeeding now, they couldn't deny that something important was happening. Mrs. Yamamoto, the chemistry teacher, started sending struggling students to Robert instead of to detention when they failed tests. Go see Mr. Martinez, she'd tell them. He'll help you understand the material. Coach Williams, who also taught history, began recommending Robert to his student athletes who were in danger of becoming ineligible due to poor grades. Even the EI guidance counselors started referring students to Robert, grateful to have someone who could help immediately instead of adding names to a 6-month waiting list. But the biggest change happened with the students themselves. Kelly, the student with dyslexia, started coming to Robert's room every day. He worked with her differently than her regular teachers did, using visual aids and hands-on methods that made sense to her brain. For the first time in her school life, she didn't feel stupid. My whole life, people have told me I'm slow, Kelly told Robert one afternoon. But you showed me I'm not slow. I just learned differently. That changed everything for me. Andrew, the homeless student living with his uncle, found stability in Robert's consistent presence. He knew that no matter what chaos his home life brought, he could show up at 4 p.m. on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and Robert would be there, ready to help. You're like my anchor, Andrew said once. Everything else in my life keeps changing and falling apart, but you're always here. The other students noticed too, the ones who weren't failing, who didn't need tutoring. They saw David walking taller in the hallways. They saw Lisa volunteering to answer questions in chemistry class. They saw Tommy's confidence growing as his English improved. And they wondered, who was this teacher who used to be a janitor? The one everyone said was changing lives? One day, a reporter from the local newspaper showed up at Helen's office. I heard a rumor, the reporter said, about a janitor at this school who became a teacher. Is it true? Helen hesitated. The story could bring positive attention, but it could also bring scrutiny. After consulting with Robert, she decided to let the reporter write it. The article ran 2 weeks later. From mop to mentor,